Now let's talk about different levels of management in GCP. When using GCP, it's important to ask a fundamental question. Do you manage the infrastructure, or does Google? This helps us understand the levels of responsibility involved and ultimately how much effort your team needs to put in with a given service. Depending on the type of project you're working on, the amount of control over infrastructure can vary significantly. Some projects require you to have full control, perhaps for customization or specific business needs. For others, though, minimizing your involvement in infrastructure is key to reducing operational overhead and focusing on building the product itself. That's why Google offers different levels of operational responsibilities to suit a variety of needs, from fully unmanaged solutions where you handle everything to fully serverless services where Google takes care of all aspects of the infrastructure. If we look at the visual on the slide, you'll see a gradient representing these levels of management, each of the terms on this gradient. Starting with unmanaged on the left, represented by the wrench icon, this is where you're basically responsible for everything, setting up, maintaining, and configuring the infrastructure. Moving along to managed in the middle, Google begins to take over more operational tasks, helping you focus on your application rather than the underlying setup. And then finally, we have serverless on the far right, symbolized by the cloud icon. And here, Google fully abstracts the infrastructure, allowing you to concentrate purely on your code and business logic, while the rest is automatically managed by the platform, including scaling. This range of options ensures that GCP can meet the needs of different projects and teams, offering as much or as little control as they require. So let's understand a bit more what unmanaged services are. Think of these gears as the infrastructure that GCP provides for you. While GCP gives you all the essential components, the hardware, compute resources that make it run, you are the one who configures and manages it. One example of an unmanaged service is Compute Engine. With Compute Engine, GCP offers an infrastructure as a service, or IaaS, model. You get the raw computing power, but managing and optimizing it for your needs is your responsibility. So as the user, you configure the scaling. The scaling icon here represents the need to determine how your application should grow. Should it add more servers during peak traffic, or scale down when things are quiet? With unmanaged services, all of these decisions and configurations fall on you. You also configure networking, setting up subnets, IP addresses, and security rules. In unmanaged services, it's your responsibility to establish and manage all the networking aspects. You're in control of making sure everything communicates securely and efficiently. You also configure the operating system, or at least choose it, symbolized here by the Linux penguin. This level of management responsibility gives you the full ability to maximize customizability, allowing you to tailor your infrastructure, networking, scaling, and operating system to fit the precise needs of your project. But that also means that you have more management overhead, obviously. So maximize customizability, but more management overhead. Now let's talk about managed services in GCP. First, the big idea here is that GCP takes care of most of the underlying responsibilities for you. GCP manages the infrastructure, which means handling things like server setup, software installation, and operating system maintenance. All of that is taken care of by Google. Even though GCP is handling the foundation, you control how your application is configured and deployed. Think about it like having Google build and maintain the engine while you decide how you want the car to be driven. You still set up how your application works to meet your needs. Examples of managed services in GCP are shown at the bottom. We have App Engine for deploying applications without worrying about server maintenance, Kubernetes Engine for containerized applications where infrastructure is still managed for you, but you control deployment configurations, and Cloud Bigtable for a managed NoSQL database. These are just a few, and I picked these because they are managed services, but they're not no-ops, which is what we're going to talk about in the next slide. No-ops services are managed, but not all managed services are no-ops. These services are managed, but no-ops at the bottom here. And there are many more managed services that are available that give you flexibility while freeing you from a lot of operational overhead. And some of them, as we're about to see, are also serverless or no-ops. Most services in GCP are at least managed, actually, which means Google is taking care of a significant portion of the maintenance and operational responsibilities. Now let's explain no-ops services, also called serverless services. In these services, GCP abstracts away infrastructure and server management, including things like scaling. As we talked about previously, all no-ops services are also managed, but not all managed services count as no-ops. Another way of describing this step to serverless is that GCP raises the level of abstraction even further. Therefore, you as the user can simply focus on writing code or defining the application logic. The visual of the hand holding the code perfectly captures this idea. GCP is essentially doing all the heavy lifting for you and letting you concentrate purely on the code or the data or the application. This level of abstraction is what makes serverless services so appealing. Some examples of serverless services in GCP include PubSub, which allows event-driven messaging, Cloud Functions, which is a lightweight way to run individual code snippets in response to events, Cloud Run for stateless containers, and Dataflow, which handles streaming and batch data processing. So all of these services allow you to do these things without manual server management, hence the term serverless. Remember, serverless services are also managed. With serverless resources, you focus purely on code and logic, while GCP manages everything else. It's the highest level of abstraction, basically. And that's it for this section on what it means for a service to be managed, unmanaged, and no ops.